Welcome to the podcast today. Recently, I was reading some things that Nikola Tesla had said, and it made me think to myself, well, hold up there. I thought I understood Tesla. And then I decided to read everything that Tesla has ever written to see what his philosophy really was. And it has shocked me. So I had to write an article. The article basically started off as Nikola Tesla versus what you're dealing with here. Once I had reread everything to make sure that I wasn't mistaken, and I haven't really spoken publicly about Nikola Tesla much, I'm going to say emphatically that he was demon possessed, and that the inventions that come up that are part of the fivefold structure that he called his world system basically has come to pass. And so he is the father of modern technology. And for a long time, people felt, they didn't know him at all. And then they felt very sorry for him. Do not feel sorry for this man. I have now read everything that he has written, and I have actually seen other patents besides the ones that are included in the collected works that you'll find, anywhere out there on Amazon. And I've read through all of those, of course, in the past, and used some of them for a few inventions that that I participated in. And I can tell you that essentially you're working with a madman. You're working with a person who said, for some, they call it God. For others, they call it physics. So he is a materialist, one of the worst of materialists. But he was also, as people generally do know, a very, very peculiar person. But when you study what he says in his pseudo autobiography called My Inventions and other works that he has written, which have autobiographical remarks in them, if you take only his words, which I recently did put in an article, and basically described who I believe he is and the dangers of Teslaism, and put some quotes of Rudolf Steiner pointing out what electricity really is and what electricity is in terms of beings, and then used his own words, Tesla's own words, to then describe for you his world philosophy. Now, this world philosophy, I would have to say, is the worst form of materialism that I've ever encountered. You and I know that every once in a while you'll see these couple beautiful quotes of Nikola Tesla on Facebook or online, where he says something that if you want to know the secrets of the universe, look in terms of energy, vibration, and frequency, something to that effect. It's in the article I've written here. And what does that mean? It means everything's material for him. He didn't say look in terms of angels or archangels or God or intelligent design, nothing. But on the other hand, because he considered himself a Buddhist, you'll hear him now and then make reference to the luminiferous ether or to the ethers or to such things as the following. He says that modern science would be shocked to find out what electricity truly is. In other places, he says scientists have no idea what electricity is. And remember, he's the person who helped change direct current, which was very limited and had to be near its source, to alternating current, which could then be spread all over the world in a spiderwork network, spiderwork web of pseudo intelligence. Rudolf Steiner, in the quotes that I've given you, in one of the quotes, he states that electricity, and particularly wireless and telegraphy, will eventually lead to human beings being presented with so much information through those devices that they will no longer know how to think. And this is what I have put forth in numerous articles, describe which you can find in Neo-Anthroposophy and through our other sites, which you can find, and in some of the books that we've done. You will find that, in fact, electricity described by is light that is into death. In other words, all of our electrical lines hold the death of light. Now, light in its suffering and deeds, Goethe says, and he says, create the color rainbow, or basically they color our world. All color in the world is because of light falling into this world. But if light falls into a magnetic field and then is put into copper or aluminum wires and then extended all over the earth so that we then have this illusion of the power of electricity, don't you think it would be good to have a philosophy of what it is that we have just allowed to take over our entire modern world? Our entire modern world is based upon Tesla. And I'm going to demonstrate this because of a system that he created called the world system. And when you hear this, you're going to say to yourself, wait a second, that is the same thing that we call now the Internet of Things plus the Internet of the body or bodies, our human bodies. Correct. He predicted all that is happening and more and gave to what, and he all the time is talking about not peace, but war. And the way that, yes, his inventions will lead to more war and bigger war, but he hopes that eventually they will lead to robotic wars or wireless, what he calls automatonic wars, and that will then end all wars. Of course, that's complete nonsense. It's ridiculous. Anyone should know that. But he was a child in his mind. And he, as far as I can tell, by looking at all of his autobiographical remarks, just from analyzing those without looking at all that biographers have done in terms of describing his life and what other people thought of him, which I've also studied for a long time, but I never really understood that he believed that the world is just a machine and that humans are machines. He actually calls himself an automaton. In other words, a robot. And he says there's no such thing as a thought that's ever arisen in his mind that didn't come from a direct perception of the world. In other words, all of his inspirations, which he formulated in his mind as pictures that he believed that were as real as if he had made them out of the substance that he was picturing in his mind. And he said he could work on them, he could smell them, he could see their wear marks, he could see all aspects of them as if they were literally physically already brought into existence, all in his mind. And he spent, mind you, his whole life in that magical world of his. And he lived in a magical world. And that, because look at his inventions, whether it be electricity that is turned into our digital world, whether it be his wireless, which is turned into all broadcasting, every type of broadcasting, whether it be what he calls the art of individualization, which of course is all of our cryptography, our public key infrastructure, or the Federal Bridge Authority, all of these things, he already predicted all of them. And then he also predicted that he would, through the fifth element of what he calls his world system, 5 elements of his world system, that's all we need. And then he can control every human being and everything on the earth, everything that has any energy. The last one, of course, is the Tesla terrestrial standing wave. Now, if I were to describe that, you would really be shocked, because what that does is it breaks apart the gravity of the Earth. Yeah, that's all. And which would, of course, then change probably our relationship with the moon. And Rudolf Steiner said that when this ultimate force beyond electricity and electromagnetism would come, which is the third force, he said that mankind would be able to move the planets. Well, that's exactly what the fifth point of Nikola Tesla's world system is all about. These standing waves, they've been used by Russia, they've been used by China to try to push back the weather in the northern aspects of their country, particularly Russia. And then they started this disaster that the tundra started to melt, and they started to have gigantic sinkholes and all this fantastic problems because they were using Tesla's standing wave. The standing wave is kind of like remember, each of these 5 things that he talks about, transducers, which is really changing from DC to AC, magnifying transmitters, the wireless system, the art of individualization, and terrestrial standing waves. These 5 things, the inventions that arise out of them, are our modern world. The modern world that Rudolf Steiner says, this electrifying and this wireless principle, would create so much data, so much information, that the human being would not be able to handle it. They would be overwhelmed, and they would lose the capacity for clear thinking. Is that not a description of our modern world created by our digital devices? We have written articles, which are in Neo-Anthroposophy, that you can go and read about the illnesses that are created by these devices. As a matter of fact, if you line up the distribution and the timing of 5G with the people who were the most affected by COVID with confirmed cases of COVID, you'll find that they are incidental. Now, that's true also because they are in the larger cities, and that's where supposedly the transmissibility of these supposed viruses are supposed to happen. But the point is that it is not an accident that in 1913, when when telegraphy started to spread all over Europe and America, and particularly to military bases where it was first installed, that's when the Spanish flu arose. It 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, every G that we release, every new generation of electrical transmission, wirelessly or otherwise with wires, it doesn't matter, causes illness of human beings. Electrosensitivity, basically, scientists who are doing the studies would have to say that everyone has electrosensitivity to some degree or another. Some, it's debilitating and it drives them crazy. And right now, because of 5G beamforming, which takes multiple, much higher than the gigahertz that the transmission, the audio transmission or video coming across your phone, to create beamforming, it can become 10 times stronger than 5G signal until they can triangulate from the different 5G antennas, and that goes through your head. That's called beamforming. Well, that's why people are, turning around thinking they're seeing something, and then they spaz out. They even die. What is it? They're turning around to look at. They're turning around to look at the fact that beamforming is going through their head. So understand what this technology is. The technology used in a good way can be good, but it inherently is filled with immorality. It is filled with subnatural forces, whether it be your telephone, your television, your radio, your computer, any of these things, right? What is going on there? That is happening in a realm that is unseen, in the realm of electricity. When you see a spark of electricity, even like lightning, you're seeing the air. That's what's going on fire. There, you can't see electricity. Electricity is in the unseen world. No one knows where it comes from. Well, we can tell you where it comes from if you're a spiritual scientist, which I may make allusion to here in a bit. It's white light is invisible. Even the white is only because of the backdrop of what's behind it. So when we're talking about electricity, we're talking about an invisible force. And where does it come from? It comes from electrostatic energy. And where does that come from? That comes from warmth. It comes from things moving around. As soon as things start to move around, there's the possibility that warmth can be created out of that chaos, and then it can start to organize and become light. And if it organizes more, it becomes sound. And if it organizes more, it becomes life. Those are the four ethers: warmth, light, sound, and life. And what we're taking here is electrostatic energy is light. It's the luminiferous ether. It's the light ether. Even Tesla, I have a quote in the paper, you can read it. So he was quoting them, and he makes reference to the luminiferous ether, which the fact that there is a substance that light travels through, that it's able to propagate through, that's called luminiferous for light ether. If you take that, that is really the electrostatic energy that causes all exchanges of electrons, you might call it in scientific terms, modern science terms, or energy exchanges between all substances. And as we know, science will tell us, and it's not true, that really nothing is ever destroyed. It's recycled. Well, there can be creation out of nothingness, and there can be the ultimate destruction of substance. So, but if you just take what they're saying, that's the principle here, is that everything gets transformed. So electrostatic energy, well, that's what creates lightning. Imagine. But when it creates lightning, it becomes electromagnetic because it relates to the magnetic field of the earth. So when we create electromagnetism, we're pulling down electrostatic energy, right? Well, what is electrostatic energy? The truth of the matter, they are two-dimensional beams coming from all directions of an angel alighting in this space as a shadow for just a moment. They're hierarchical beings. They're forces that are cast off into our world as a donation for us so that we can live. Think of the donation of light from the solar beings of the sun. Without that, we'd have no warmth, light, sound, or life. We'd have no life. There'd be nothing. And the stars, where do they say that the chemicals in your body, the minerals in your body, come from? The stars. So you are a stellar being, and Tesla said this. He said, everything is connected. Everything is one. And so sometimes when you're reading Tesla, you're thinking, oh, this is lovely. No, that's Luciferic. Going to reincarnate as that same human being in another incarnation, energy. But now then they'll say that there's intelligent design. So there's the consciousness. But a being that has that intelligence, or that intelligence is a being, or they're just forces. They try to make it into forces. And that's what Tesla did. And it's done. Let me give you another example. All that I was just talking about, any of those references to computers and all that, that's step one of his world system, which he calls transducers. But basically, it's the electricity that we take for granted here in our modern world. None of us hardly can understand the way electricities manifest, and almost no one can understand the philosophical implications of what electricity is and whether it's life or it's death. It seems to have life. We turn it into horsepower. We turn it into the work agent. We turn it into our slaves. But what is it really? Where does it come from? Just because you make a spinning with a magnet with copper wrapped around it, where does this electricity come from? And it stops when you stop creating the field. And it automatically makes a magnetic field all along the wires that you transmit it. So what is it? Earth, with all five of his steps of his world system and his inventions, which he did invent, and he did manifest all of these. And there's many inventions that people don't know about that he created. For instance, he could translate matter from one place to another, or controlling when that would happen. So when you're talking about some of the technology you see on Star Trek, that is Tesla technology. There are many of these that are military secrets developed by DARPA and In-Q-Tel, and all you have to do is go and look on their wish list. They have put out a wish list each year, and basically they'll give you the Tesla patent that they want you to figure out. Because why? All Tesla patents have been turned into weapons of war against humanity, because Tesla didn't believe that humans were human. He believed they were robots. They were automatons. They were machines. He believed the universe was a machine. And he believed that he, and he alone, which is his Luciferic pride, because he was certainly embodied the Luciferic spirit, especially when he was young. He couldn't keep his mind from creating things that would destroy the world if they were put into place. And later, he actually did that. And he was so obsessed that when it broke down to the fact that he had to invent alternating current, he was willing to kill himself, not eat, not drink, not breathe, nothing, if the secret of alternating current, which then led to our modern world. That's just number one. But that led to our computers. It led to all of this technology. And so when I say digital technology, I mean all electronic technology. Lighting in your house, the heating that you might get, the car batteries, you name it, all of it came from Tesla's invention. Number one, what he called transducers. Number two is called magnifying transmitter. Being a person with a degree in this, and I was in the NSA, and I helped develop some of these things unwittingly. I helped transform microwave into accelerated particle beams of microwave by simply narrowing the channel and not caring about the transmission levels, but just focusing the energy of it. Well, Tesla created that. It's called magnifying transmitters, right? Well, that created basically the ability for all wireless to be created, when you could then later create a radio that could pick up these waves that were being sent out. So what is a magnifying transmitter? They now call it active denial. They put a dish antenna on top of a Humvee. They aim it at a group of people. They dial in a frequency. Some of these frequencies can make babies go to sleep. Some can make only old people go to sleep. Some can make everybody feel that anything they're touching that is metal is burning hot. That's how you make your enemies drop their weapons. Some can make them go unconscious, some frequencies. Some frequencies can kill them. This is the death ray. And no one was. And I'll tell you a little bit more of some of the crazy ones in a minute, but nobody was saying, well, you can't make magnifying transmitters, because if you make the particle beam small enough, it becomes a laser. If you use light, so it's all about, as he said, it's all about energy, frequency, and vibration. And he was the master of that. So he created the ability to create beams or waves that were turned into beams. And these became accelerated particle beams that we have launched on platforms in space. They became all kinds of weapons that they don't even talk about. Sometimes you see them used, but they won't tell you about the technology. Why? Because this technology was developed from Tesla. So magnifying transmitters, okay? In other words, the first thing that he invented after the electricity that rules our lives, and none of us give any praise or any thanks to those beings of light who gave up a part of themselves and sacrificed and donated a part of themselves for us to have slaves that do our work through electricity. Plus, when people die, if they're materialists, they don't go beyond the realm of the moon. So guess what? They live in those waves. So when I helped Kathleen Kennedy write the script for Poltergeist, I made sure that she knew that if you touch the screen of the old televisions, which were vacuum tubes, which used basically accelerated particle beams, beaming this stuff at the inside of the tube, touch it, and you'll be touching the dead. You'll directly be able, through that vacuum, to communicate to the dead. And this has been proven 1,000 times. I knew this from real life cases, having worked with an exorcist before. So this technology is filled with demons. And in the cathode ray tube was not only doing that, but it was harming the person who was looking at the TV. And then the fact that once you hypnotize someone with a cathode ray tube at 60 hertz per second, the refresh rate of the old televisions, you can hypnotize them. And they found this out in the mid 60s, or really early 60s, and they made it completely legal to subliminally control anyone who watches one of those old cathode ray tube televisions. And it's still true with the digital, but not as much. But it doesn't matter. The sophistication of the subliminal, silent subliminal programming in digital televisions is so profound that you can't even imagine it. Plus, they're listening devices. They can emit things you don't know that they're emitting. They can actually put thoughts in your brain if they want. If they target you, they can use your own digital big screen to tell you to go do something that, like a hypnotic person who's hypnotized, you have no control over. Oh, because he brought in all these demons. He laid the foundation with his patents, but there are many, many, many other drawings he did of things that he never patented that he said were way too dangerous. And he talks about some of them, and we know about some of them because of other people who interacted with him. But let's just go to number 3, wireless, the Tesla wireless system. Remember Marconi, he says in his autobiography, Tesla does, that Marconi stole 17 of his patents. He didn't care. He just wanted the technology to get out there, and that he was serving with his whole life. Every single speck of his being was serving this being. And he did create wireless, and that wireless now sends through your body. Nobody knows, but because these things bounce off our atmospheres, right? So every single radio broadcast, theoretically, bounces off our atmosphere infinitely. It diminishes after time, but they found some cases where there's strange atmospheric things where you can actually literally hear broadcasts from a previous time. Yes, you can hear broadcasts from a previous time because they're still bouncing around, and every once in a while surface, and someone will pick them up on a ham radio set. But the point is that this stuff never stops. So everything that has ever been transmitted on every stupid radio station, every stupid television station, in the whole time that they've existed, is still beaming through our atmosphere and going through your body right now, especially if you live anywhere near those things. Or, oh, how about this? Every single microwave tower, every single radio repeater tower, which all over America, it's completely filled with them, right? You can't get away from this. You can't hardly find a place that doesn't have this coming down in massive amounts. I would tell you the number of individual beams that they've been able to count, but you wouldn't believe me. Let's just put it at the fact that it's in the millions. Okay, thank you, Mr. Tesla. We thank you for electrifying our bodies, which are a column of fluid that acts as an antenna and as a transmitter. And instead of being able to send thoughts, which are the transmissions of that antenna, which I talked about and Steiner talked about before, I mentioned his reference to that. That antenna is so busy now it can't think. So you can't send out a thought. Many people can't send out a thought. They don't have a thought. They don't have a single thought in the whole day. They're automatons. They're exactly what Tesla said that he wanted them to become: an automaton or automata, a bunch of robots that could be controlled through automatonics. It means wireless control of the automatons, and we are those automatons. And tell me that isn't exactly what we would call the Pilgrim Society, or others would call the Deep State, others would call the World Economic Forum, others would call them globalists or transnationalists or the tech lords, whatever you want to call them, the people making all the money off of this, who never ever get checked for the morality involved in their inventions, which are usually taken from stolen patents, by the way, and used for military purposes. They're made into bioweapons. They're made into electromagnetic frequency weapons, like I just mentioned. Active denial. Active denial. They don't have to go to war anymore. They simply put up some antennas and shoot them at your enemy, and they all drop over dead. Well, then why are we having wars over places like Ukraine? Why don't we use these things? Because they're used at the highest top level and they are still experimenting with them. But back in the Panamanian War, people didn't believe me. There were accelerated particle beams in space. They've been there since I was in the military back, that would have been, say, 74, 75. I kept track of them in space with these gigantic and fantastic antennas. And these accelerated particles, that's what Reagan was talking about, these eyes in the sky. And what did they do during the Panamanian War just to show, just for fun in Panama? They melted down the enemy's tanks into puddles of metal from space repeatedly. And now we see that happening with some of this fire starting in California. You see this, you literally can see the beam coming from space. Oh, what should we do about that? Thank you. Because why? What you've done to people, the more you use your cell phone, the more a child, they've done the studies, the more the child is on the cell phone, the more they have depression and suicidal ideation and suicide, period. We've given you all the research on that in our articles. So we know where it's headed. Let's look at the next one. Oh, the next one is very interesting. The art of individualization, which is the super secret way to know that every single machine has its own signature, its own name. So 1,000 iPhones lined up. Doesn't matter. Every one of them is individualized, and you send a Tesla signal into it. It recognizes it, imprints it that that's that particular iPhone, and then you can have a secure communication with it. We know people working on this right now, as a matter of fact. And the other day, matter of fact, this was one of the things that led me to this, writing this article and doing this podcast, is the art of individualization. Because the people who own the crypto keys, they own everything. We've told you who they are. We've gone through that for years and years and years. But the point is that whoever controls the crypto keys controls everything in our today's digital world, as long as it keeps getting more centralized. And by the way, Tesla was all about centralizing everything. He wanted one world government. He was also a eugenicist. He wanted to kill most of the people on the earth. And so you can see why his inventions all have weaponry application. And they are, in fact, the biggest weapons on the face of the earth right now. And they're not even considered weapons because they're innovation. They're new. They make our life go faster. They do our work for us. Oh, of course, I'm going to put my dishes in the dishwasher. Where does the electricity come? Well, I know where some of it comes from for mine, but I can't tell you actually how it goes from the solar panels to my dishwasher. And so there again, I am crippled in even being able to understand the forces that I'm using. And if they go out, well, I'm out of luck. And look at most great civilizations that we know that have been on the earth. They all of a sudden blink out. And in most cases, we don't even know why. Well, if we turned off all the electricity, folks, most of humanity, certainly in the Western world, would evaporate, if you know what I mean. And so we have to, many people will tell you Nikola Tesla is Lucifer, only incarnating now, luciferically deluded, insane person who was, there's also the suffering of all the people, all the humans who work together to create the conglomerated capacity, the accumulated capacity of what all the sub-routines, all the programs, all the inventions, all the patents over all the time that made this computer do what it does, which I have no idea what any of that really is, then it eats me unless I thank it. So I'm thanking you, Mr. Computer. And I'm thanking every single person. It's like when you eat your food, you should thank the farmers. You should thank the truckers. You should thank the people who made the fuel to put in the trucks. You should try to thank every single being that was involved in the food that brought you your nourishment, and then it will be better nourishment for you because you've raised it to a higher consciousness. Well, that's true with everything you use. Everything's a tool. But if it's, as we know, when these tools are used by men in the wrong way, like DARPA and InQtel and the Department of Defense, they're used to kill people. Because just like Nikola Tesla, they're eugenicists. They thing for Tesla was, how can we get rid of the people? So therefore he created automatonics so that he could control human beings and turn them off. And he literally said that absolutely all the things Margaret Sanger said, oh no, he said it with a vengeance. He's one of the worst eugenicists that I've ever read. And he basically says that there should be a committee that determines whether you can ever have a baby. And if you can't, you're sterilized right there on the spot, period, done. You can't be a breeder. And he hated breeders and he hated homes and he said, no married man ever made a good invention. Okay, that's the worst thing anyone could say. He also hated women. Okay, and he had no association with people. So he had all the Because why? We haven't done what he told us to do. Asperger's types of disorders. He had every disorder practically that I know of and that I've seen in the psych ward. And beyond that, he had a Luciferic pride that was it was unparalleled. And we haven't done his whole world system. And the fifth thing on it is, of course, the standing wave. But once you get this system down, because he says, and then he makes a list of everything he can do, communications across the world completely insecure, controlling anything that's automatonic that is connected to a wireless connection that is specifically tuned to it. He goes on and he lists everything that they want to do with the Internet of Things, and it's about the aggressive remote control of the human being and all things. They pretty much are getting all things down with the ISBN codes and the codes on everything. Well, they have that down. But now it's got to be the human, what the human thinks, what the human spends, how they're going to spend their money, where they're going to get their money, what they're going to do, and limiting them so that they don't go outside of the box that could be controlled by a centralized world system of Nikola Tesla. So when it comes down to it, I thought that it was Richard C. Walker who came up with the first Internet of Things that then was the cluster patent for everything that came afterwards that controlled human beings through aggressive remote control wirelessly. Actually, Nikola Tesla came up with it. It's called the world system. And so what I'm saying to you now is, please be mindful of the fact that you live in a kingdom that is subnatural. There's no light there. It's all in the darkness. It's all below the human being. It is not alive, though it appears to be alive. It's below the animal, the plant. And though it uses minerals, it's below the mineral. We can look at the minerals in this computer, but it doesn't do what the computer does when electricity goes through it. When the life, you could almost call it the lifeblood of the angels, the archangels. When it's electromagnetic, it's the archangels. And when it's the gravity, which soon they will be doing, and by the way, both Wilhelm Reich and Nikola Tesla figured out ways to create earthquakes. And Rudolf Steiner says, the more electricity we use and the more wireless we use, expect more earthquakes and volcanoes and all kinds of other disturbances to the physical etheric body of the earth. Nikola Tesla's inventions have attacks on them, attacks nobody wants to talk about. Okay. Now, whether you're thankful or not, well, that makes all the difference in the world. This is attacks of your own livelihood, your own blood. Literally, it's the ego in your blood that is being eaten by these devices. So every time you use one of these devices, you are being taxed. They can't tax you if you give it up freely and you're happy to do so. It doesn't hurt so much. So if you're thankful to these devices, if you're thankful to electricity, for light, just try to live without these things for a while. I've made it a mission in my summer times, being a teacher, to go live without any of these things. Don't ever listen to the radio. Go out into nature, completely live in nature. And that is the opposite. People nowadays just laugh at me and say, well, you're a Luddite, you're against all machines. I'm not against all machines. And just as Rudolf Steiner said, we have to learn to live with these things, but we have to use them for our own good and not let them be used unconsciously for bad. And that's my point. So wake up. Those are G, the new 6G, the new 7G, the new 8G, all of that is paid for a price. And that price is much more dear than you can possibly ever imagine. If you see our articles, it'll tell you all about electromagnetic sensitivity. And many of the illnesses of our age are directly related to that. In our houses, because they're all wired and they're basically an orgone box, a Wilhelm Reich orgone box. You don't want to be in an orgone box. Well, most of our houses are that way. So if you don't counteract them with something like biogeometry or putting some crystals in there or being conscious of what really is going on in your house, and knowing what the energy source that gives you your life, we wouldn't even have life. Think of it. Turn off all electricity in America for a month. How many people do you think would survive? So what is electricity? I'll ask every one of you. I dare you to try to find out. What is electricity? Even in a scientific terms, they will tell you all of the effects. They'll tell you what it can do. They'll give you these silly theories, and the theories don't agree, by the way. So look at a variety of theories. And then you can go into the electric universe theory, and you can see that people who really know the effects of electricity look out on our universe and they see electrical manifestations all the time. Well, electricity is light, and light is thought. But thought has to fall into light, and it brings either wisdom with it, which perpetuates it, or no wisdom, which then it turns into nothingness. And then that light turns into electricity. But if you don't understand that, then you think you deserve it. You think you deserve the inventions of the modern world, which are done on the blood, sweat, and tears of millions and millions of people working their entire life to give you what we have, and we aren't thankful for it, and we use it in the wrong ways. So we try to use it so that though you confront the modern world and you see all the evil, like I'm talking about, the evil of all these 5 things that literally these 5 things have led to thousands of millions probably of patents and inventions, millions, but certainly tens of thousands of patents and inventions from these 5 things that Tesla demonstrated. There's many, many, many others that Tesla did. Matter of fact, there's certain types of, we've shown you this. Go look at what we say about the cube. The cube was 3 types of Tesla antennas, which I studied and put into the cube. And then at the same time, on the Earth, 2 other Bell Laboratory invented the exact same thing, except they use electronics. And another person down in Australia built the same thing. And they're the best antennas ever made, but they're not being used now. They won't be used. And that's Tesla technology. So what you can tell about Tesla is that in most cases, when you study science and invention, if someone invented something somewhere else upon the earth, completely distinct from them, someone else invented the same thing. Usually 3 people invent something that mankind needs at the same time. And it's usually out of a necessity, or sometimes it's by an accident, but not like Tesla's inventions. No, those were contrived, and those were literally channeled from demonic sources. So our invention of the cube, the same time we did it, I said to my beautiful wife, well, I'm going to watch this. I'm going to look this up, and I promise you that somebody else has just invented something just like this. It didn't take 10 seconds, and Bell Laboratory is bragging about their new cube antenna, which used the exact same principles. And then I looked a little bit further, and the third person was doing the same thing. So these things, that is different. When the Spirit inspires for progressive evolution for the health and well-being of humanity, that's one thing. But when someone invents it because they're prideful, and he didn't even invent it because of money. He did it to aid the eugenicists. He did it for depopulation. He did it to create a death ray. He says he did. He says, yes, his wireless broadcasting will be the worst weapon ever created in history. It will kill lots of people. And yet we must go forward with this. Because why? He doesn't then back up and say, because I want lots and lots of people to die because people bother me. And really, that's the bottom line. Matter of fact, they say that the only thing that Tesla loved were the pigeons he fed when he was at the Waldorf Astoria. He was in the pit house there, and he'd come out and he'd feed the pigeons. And that's about the only time people saw him, unless he was in a business meeting. And then he was so obsessed with germs and physical things, you see, that he would have a stack of napkins, and he would eat there at the Waldorf Astoria until J.P. Morgan didn't give him any more money, because he said he could create for J.P. Morgan a car that ran on just a device that's just about this big, and you plug it into your car, and it's an antenna, receives from the earth all the electricity it needs to run. So he showed this to J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan says, well, where do I put the meter to charge for this energy? And Tesla says, no, it's free. It's everywhere. What are you talking? We're not going to charge for this energy. J.P. Morgan didn't fund him anymore, so he wasn't in the Waldorf Astoria. But when he was there, he'd be fed these wonderful meals, but he would have a stack of napkins, and he'd take a bite. He wore white gloves almost always to eat. He'd wear white gloves. He couldn't stand to have any dirt on him or anything like that. Nothing germs. He had to be completely germ-free. And when he'd eat, take one bite, put it down, have to take a napkin, wipe his mouth, and then put that napkin aside. And sometimes when he'd go from one food to the next, he'd have to use a different utensil because he couldn't contaminate the food. Obsessive compulsive disorder. Does that want to live by his devices? Then I suggest you understand his philosophy. And that philosophy should teach you that a human being, human interest. That's what Rudolf Steiner says. These are toys, people. These are toys. This toy tries to convince me that I'm omniscient. I can look up anything I want. I'm omniscient. I'm omnipresent. I can go and look at pictures of anything in the world. I can go to cameras taking pictures of Wuhan right now if I want. Okay, so I'm everywhere, right? And I'm omnipresent. I'm omniscient, and I'm basically think I'm God with this. Did I have anything to do with the programming or the apps in this? No. Do I even know how to use anything more myself? More than 1% of it? No. If a demon got a hold of this, what could they do? Oh, well, you see that in all the movies. They blow up stuff. They do all kinds of criminal activity. Michael McKibben's social networking, in other words, the ability to do these things worldwide, which Tesla promised would happen, by the way. He said his stuff would be worldwide. Everyone could do this. Everything could be encoded. Everything could be beautiful. And every person could be controlled aggressively.